and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale. I usually represent the Christian and Seeker side on the previous show of Skeptics and Seekers. And today we actually have a couple guests on the show, sort of a joint venture. So it's an SNS and Real Seekers show today. So in the first place, David, welcome back to the show.
Hi, and welcome everyone to another exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers. I'm your host, David, and wait a minute. It's kind of a combo thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sure. So I don't know who I am or what I'm doing today. Very confusing. Nice to be here.
Excellent, and we're joined by a special guest to have a convo here. Someone I've been on his show about 3 times already, but we have Robert Stanley from the Right to Reason podcast. Welcome, Robert.
Hey, a special guest. That makes me sound awesome.
Extra
Thanks.
Special.
I'm just some dude. But yeah, we love having you on every time, man. Always makes for great content, good conversation.
Excellent.
Kind of like at a circus with the moose-faced boy. People just can't get enough of him.
I was going to describe it that way. And, I hate how he drinks too much.
You weren't supposed to tell them about that, Robert. Come on.
I believe the belligerent part.
Okay, so that's it for David. We're gonna move on. So perfect. Yeah. So what we're doing today, I wanted to bring on Robert as a guest and let him sort of select topics that were important to him. And so we've agreed upon 3 major topics. So the first one is going to be just sort of a general. Is the Bible true? True or false, and that sort of thing. We're going to get Robert's take on what his opinion of that is, and then go back and forth a little on that. Then the second section is going to be on religion and politics. So Robert is a political science major, so that's a topic that interests him. And then finally, we're going to close off on a section about morality of the Bible. Is it an immoral book and stuff like that? Just before we get into anything, just for the people in the audience that aren't familiar with you, Robert, why don't you give sort of an introduction as to who you are, plug any projects that you have, as well give us a notion of where you're coming from in your so-called quote-unquote faith journey or deconversion process or something like that.
Yeah, I host the podcast, The Right to Reason. You can find it at therighttoreason.com, patreon.com/right, or on YouTube. Just type in The Right to Reason, or just Google it, it'll pop up. But I was intending to become a pastor. Dad was a preacher, brother a preacher, and grew up in a evangelical fundamentalist, independent Baptist household. Went to Bob Jones University for my seminary, and I dropped out. I kept asking God what I should do. I kept just trying to do what I thought God wanted me to do, and I kept talking to Him, but no one was talking back. And eventually, that silence became kind of loud in a way. You know what I mean? And I just had to check out. I had to stop. I had to give up on this thing that clearly was a complete lie. And I think of religion more like a virus, where it's not Dale's fault for having this cancer that eats a society, for being infected with this virus. I sympathize with Dale. I sympathize with believers. I understand how they feel, where they're coming from, and I don't want to use the word pity because it sounds almost condescending, but and that's certainly not my intention, but I feel bad for them, and that's why I started the podcast, is more or less a way to be that person that helps give the push to people on the fence. Because when I was on the fence, that was a very difficult time for me. I remember panic attacks. I remember crying. I remember just being angry. That's a tough place to be. If you're very confident in your faith, boy, ignorance is bliss and you're happy. I'm not saying that people of faith are ignorant people. I'm just saying they are unaware of the truth of reality, at least in the aspect of epistemology and deities and often how science and philosophy works. I think, but you know, I could be wrong. And once again, that's not to say they're dumb or anything. Uh, Losing your faith doesn't increase your IQ in any way, obviously. Um, but it is a happier on the other side. The only thing that I would say that those of you listening that might be on that fence and you're saying, man, I really just don't feel this anymore. I'm not too sure about it. It's not adding up. Um, but I don't want to be an atheist. That sounds bad. And being on the other side of that fence is terrifying. You know, what happens to all my morals? What happens to my family? What happens to me? Am I going to turn gay? What's going to happen? The truth is that there is one downside, is you have this natural sense of gratefulness inside you for the beautiful day, for your life, for the feeling of love, how you feel when you look at your children, just all these different things, all these happy moments. A great song comes on the radio, and you just roll the windows down, and you're just like, wow, what a beautiful day this is. You feel grateful for those things, and you just have nowhere to place that. And what a lot of people do is they end up just trying to make the world a better place than it was when they came to it. So that's a good place to put that energy, I think. But there's nobody to thank. Nobody made it. Nobody did this. It wasn't intentional. But anyway, that was my spiel. That was my rant. But that was the whole reason I started the podcast. And it's kind of evolved into a little bit more than just an atheist thing. I like having conspiracy theory people on. That's probably my favorite. And, political stuff. Just having other people talking about philosophy. It actually, I don't know, it might just be 30% God talk now. As it's kind of evolved, it's kind of moved away from that. And that's one of the advantages of losing the faith, is you get a chance to ask some really fun questions that whenever you think, well, all the answers are between Genesis and Revelation, and we're done. Like once you say, wait, there's no God? Oh my God, what else is out there then? What is this? This reality is crazy, isn't it? And you get to ask a lot of fun questions after you kind of get that monkey off your back.
Yeah, I think I do want to highlight. Most of the people in my audience are aware of your show and are fans already, but just for the ones that aren't familiar with, I would highly recommend Robert's podcast, and it is interesting because he's got shows on Bigfoot for crying out loud. He's sincerely interested in tackling any and all issues. And just so you know, Robert, your show actually inspired. We have a couple of other co-hosts, Matt Taylor and Andrew Knight, who run. It used to be called Ask an Atheist Anything. So they did a show strictly dealing with religious questions and that sort of thing. But your podcast sort of inspired them to rebrand as Prometheum, and they want to widen it to politics, to other topics. So you've been an inspiration to some of the atheists in our audience there.
That's neat. I'm familiar with Ask an Atheist Anything. That's neat.
Excellent.
But I didn't know they just switched it up.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, perfect. All right. So without further ado, again, we're going to try to aim for about an hour here. So let's get straight into the first topic, and this was the topic you selected, Robert. Is the Bible true?
So for the sake of fairness, why don't I just wrestle and beat you down, Dale, and take the microphone from here?
Sure. This is your show now, David.
So, and for the record, you SNS listeners, I have no intention of going into politics. Bump that noise.
Really?
So you've got some fine options if you want to talk politics and Bigfoot. Hey, just one follow-up question, Robert. So you do a lot of Bigfoot. Do they like to be called Bigfooters or Bigfootists? Do they have a name? Are they footers or footists?
They like to be called searchers or hunters. Either that's typically
okay.
Or I just ran into this one guy. I haven't done the episode yet, but he says aliens are eating people and they touched him, and
that was his uncle. But anyway,
he might have been an illegal alien, but he's not. but one touched him, that's for sure. Anyway, but the guy claims to be a scientist, and I'm like, well, are you a real scientist? He says yes. I said, well, what's your degree? And he's like, no, just high school. But I'm researching stuff. Like, I'm really looking into this stuff, and that qualifies as scientist to him. So they always call themselves something a little bit more grandiose than they probably deserve. But out of all the crazies out there, the Bigfoot people are definitely the coolest. They're my favorite ones to talk to because they're usually just laid back guys that you want to just go grab a beer with. They're just they like spending time out in nature, and they think that's really cool, and they're pretty open to being wrong, and that to me is awesome.
Sounds like by the time you get to them, Robert, they're already a few beers in. So that said, let's jump right into these topics, shall we? The Bible, as the question was presented, is the Bible true? This is a poorly formed question. It's like asking, is Shakespeare true or is Homer true? It's really more about are the propositions, are the truth claims in it true? And is the Bible really trying to make truth claims in every page? So I think there's a lot more nuance here. So I just want to start with Robert first. Robert, when you hear a question like, is the Bible true? What comes to mind? How do you start processing that?
Well, I think Dale and I would disagree with you that that's an ill-formed question. That's a totally reasonable question, in my opinion. Is it true? It's asking, like you said, are the claims within it accurate? But also, does it have? Can we test this historically? Can we make predictive conclusions with it? Is there any scientific validity here? That kind of thing. And I would say that my answer would simply be no. It's clearly not true. I don't think it's the same as asking, is Shakespeare true? Because whether it's the Old or New Testament, it is obviously written making serious literal claims, and the writers had an intention with what they were writing. They weren't just trying to entertain or make some kind of implication about the human experience like a play might.
Okay, so great. So I think Dale may or may not disagree with me. It depends on which Dale we get today. We'll find out. But just to be clear, I do think that lots of Christians would agree with the way I asked the question. So, for instance, you are thinking about the Bible as a historical document, as if to say the Bible is making historical truth claims about what really happened and scientific claims about how the world really is. And a lot of Christians would see past that and say, no, that is not primarily what the Bible is doing. That's what it's doing sometimes on some occasions. But you have to judge those, the literature based on the type of literature it is. And so you have answered the question that when you look at the Bible, you see it fundamentally as a book that's making historical and scientific claims. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I would love to look at it in the way that you mentioned initially. That would really be cool, but that's clearly the modern Christian version of let me get out of all the problems that are contained within these books. I don't want to have to answer for all these flaws. So let's just say, it's not inerrant. It's it's a metaphor. Well, if that's the case, I don't have to give it any credence any more than a Shakespearean play. And if that's the case, you're not a Christian. You're
okay. So, Dale, you've heard this first part. I think I've set you up for an interesting response. And the interesting thing is, after debating you for a year and a half on Skeptics and Seekers, I have no idea what you're going to say next. Take it away.
Okay. So yeah, I do take both of your points. I agree with Robert that there are certain historical and even scientific implications, perhaps, that if they're asserted to be true, they by default would need to be true or that sort of thing. But I would also point out that the main purpose of Scripture is also about theological truths or spiritual truths, and that is the main focus of Scripture. So I think when you're looking at something like biblical inerrancy or is the Bible true, you have to be fair to, first of all, is it true in what it's asserting and or affirming to be actually true? And you need to look at things like the genre of the text. So there's poetry in the Bible, and I wouldn't necessarily judge that in the same way I would, in terms of historical accuracy of Jesus' existence or the resurrection of Jesus or something like that. So there is some nuance here. There's different types of literature in the Bible, and we need to be able to assess whether the Bible's true in light of these various hermeneutical principles. Like Jesus is the door. That isn't literal. He wasn't made of wood or something like that. So yeah, that would be maybe the only thing I might say is there's some nuance there.
Okay, but it sounds like you both are coming from a background, and by the way, I come from the same background of reading the Bible largely literally, but I have been talking to Christians for a long time on both sides. I went to liberal churches, so I understand the other side of this and how it thinks. I just want the audience to understand there is another side of this, not represented by either one of us on the panel. But if I were to ask the question, say, does the Bible have allegory in it? Mythology in it? The two of you might say no, and I might be inclined to say no as well. But I can tell you there's a large percentage of the Christian population that would say, oh yes, absolutely. Part of it is allegorical or even mythological. That doesn't mean that it's not speaking truth, but it's speaking the kind of truth that you get through allegory. So take the creation story, if you will. If I were to ask both of you, is that written as a literal historical-scientific fact? And both of you might say yes, but I think a lot of Christians would say no, it wasn't written that way, and to read it that way is to misread the Scripture. So do you at least understand how the other side might answer this question? I don't want to straw man Christianity by saying, well, just because the three of us come from a kind of a fundamentalist background, that somehow represents how most Christians look at the Bible.
Yeah, that would be really awesome. If I feel like I could get along with that person fairly well, but I couldn't really respect them as much as the Dale types. Like, so we're probably not going to argue about gay rights. You know what I mean? With someone like that, I probably would be able to not have the same kind of objection to women being able to make decisions about what they do with their bodies. That person seems like they might be a lot more open to truth and other facets of mythology as well, which we're on the same page there. And there's a lot of good stuff in the Bible, even if you look at it from that perspective of it being mythological and having some kind of elusive truth beneath the meaning, that kind of thing. Like that would be great. It's just that person's, they're kind of half-assing their faith. Like that's like the atheists that say, well, I'm agnostic. Like, just say it.
So Robert, you and I feel the same way about the whole agnostic thing. Kind of a chicken shit response to. Wait a minute, this is going to appear on Dale's show too. It's a chicken poop response. For the Skeptics and Seekers listeners, a chicken shit response to
Nice.
to a straightforward question.
Okay.
We can edit that later. So I just wanted to make it clear that there are different ways of viewing the Bible, and one of the reasons I think the question is somewhat ill-formed, not playing devil's advocate, is that the Bible makes lots of claims. It says lots of things. And I don't think that anyone here would say, whether atheist or Christian, would say, well, it's all not true. I mean, Robert, I mean, it's got a lot of accuracy as far as history, places, persons, names, events. Would you deny that?
No, no, I'm with you.
Okay. All right. So even then, you have to say, well, it has some truth and some false. And so, in order to make this question most useful to the audience, I think that we have to drill down a little bit. Robert, you said no, you don't think it's true and balanced. Dale, you said yes, you do think it's true and balanced. Robert, what are maybe one or two examples of things that you think the Bible says that are important that you would put in the not true category?
Well, if we're taking it literally,
well, however you take it.
yeah. Well, from the literal perspective, obviously the creation story, the fact that somebody can't live in a whale for 3 days. Anytime you say that, they're like, "It's a great fish." It's like, oh, sorry, yeah. Okay, well, someone can't live in a great fish for 3 days, or the flood. That's just dumb. It's silly. It's got a lot of that kind of dumb, silly stuff in it, I think. Mostly the Old Testament. But the New Testament, it made some claims that caused some problems throughout human history as well. But those would be some easy ones to just pick at.
Okay, so creation, Noah, flood, and the whale. Dale, you want to pick one of those and tell me why he's wrong?
Yeah, so believe it or not, on the creation account, and same with the flood. So I am of the opinion with you guys that on a balance of probabilities, this is meant to be historical narrative. But I've actually come across some recent scholarship that did diminish my confidence in that. There is this genre called mytho-history. So it accounts for things like, history, you have these genealogies, but at the same time, there are certain mythic elements in it. So there's this genre called mytho-history. It's not myth, and it's not full-scale literal history. And I do think that this is a plausible position to argue for. But on a balance of probabilities, I agree with you guys that's probably not what's happening here. So under a literalist perspective, I would probably have to say it's an error that in the sense that the Earth is not 6,000, very probably not 6,000 years old. I think it's an error that the Bible in Genesis says that the flood was global. It's above the tops of the mountains and that sort of thing. So I think it's saying under a literalistic historical perspective that the flood was global, and that's very probably not true. In terms of the Jonah story, I don't, even under a straightforward literalistic perspective, there's no problem there because it's a supernatural preservation in the belly of the fish. So I can take that literally and not have an issue with it. It's a supernatural event. That would be my take on the three examples that he gave there.
Well, why wouldn't you be able to take all of them as supernatural? I mean, you could say, look, we have geology showing us certain things about floods and the idea that it didn't happen, but it was a supernatural event, and so God didn't leave those geological traces. Or the creation story, it seems not to comport with what we can determine, astronomically about the age of the Earth, things like that. But it was a supernatural event, and so God does not have to be bound by the limits of the way things appear. Why couldn't you just say that about all of them if you're willing to say it about Jonah?
Well, I think the difference is that in the first place, the story of Jonah, the narrative itself tells us this was a supernatural event. God was at work in a special way to get Jonah to do what he wanted to do. In the case of creation or genealogical history and that sort of thing, sure, the story of creation involves supernatural creation events, right? Creating man out of the dust and that sort of thing. But God's sort of modus operandi is once he does a supernatural input, he lets nature take its course, right? After the virgin birth, after the virgin conception, Mary had a normal naturalistic pregnancy throughout the rest of her time. in delivering Jesus. So yeah, I think that when we have discoverable laws of nature that can account for the evidence that we're trying to discuss, then we should privilege that because that's consistent with God's modus operandi. Unless the Bible tells us that there's specific reason to think no, there's supernatural input behind this.
So time is tripping along. We're gonna need to get to our second topic, but I just want to close this off with a question to both of you. Robert, you've heard Dale's answer, and Dale, you've heard Robert's answer. I want to start with Robert first. Robert, it sounded to me, just listening to Dale's answer, first answer, yes, the Bible is true, but then he acknowledged two places where it may be false.
Yeah.
How did you hear that? Is it can the Bible be true and be false in some of its truth claims? Is there can it be mostly true or partly true or true enough in the important things? Do you see some nuance there?
Last night I told my son he was being punished for some grades that he had, some bad grades. I said, you got to wash all the pots and pans. And there's a pile of pots and pans from the previous evening's dinner sitting there. And he comes up to me and says, I don't know what I'm supposed to wash and what not. And I say, well, you know what pots are? He says, yes. I said, you know what pans are? He says, yes. I'm like, so you did know what you were supposed to wash. You were just hoping that if you double checked, like it would turn out better for you to say one thing and then say another thing at the same time, right? And he gets away with that because he's a child, but Dale's an adult, and I feel like he has a certain, Dale, we have, the listeners, David, myself, we have a certain expectation of consistency and integrity of speech, that whatever you claim the Bible's true and you claim the Bible is also not entirely true, that there's you pay an immediate consequence in the minds of everyone that hears you say that. That there might not be a literal consequence, like that there might not be, like, nobody's yelling at you, nobody's calling you names here. It's not like you and I are no longer friends or something, like I like you, Dale, but you have to be aware that everyone that you just said that to does not see you as an entirely honest human being, at least not intellectually honest, not addressing the world with the same level of integrity that the rest of us do whenever we apply our worldview to it. Does that make sense?
So,
okay.
Dale, you've been accused of being an adult. How do you plead?
Guilty. Yeah, okay. No, but do you mind if I just come back at that, David?
Absolutely, Dale. I want you to close off this section. Once again, I recognize that there's some nuance in what you're saying. I want to give you a chance to maybe salvage that. But I did kind of hear the original question being, well, is the Bible true? And both you and Robert kind of agreed on what you meant by that. And then you immediately said, yeah, but it may not be true here and here. So how does the hearer, how should we hear what you mean there?
Yeah, so in the first place, yes, I would love to be a biblical inerrantist, but I have to be honest to how I see the evidence, regardless of whether that makes me appear logically consistent or something like that to people or not. I just have to be honest that on a balance of probabilities, I do think the flood and the creation story are probably errors. Now, is it the case that means I'm actually logically inconsistent? No, because as David, you already know, I have my idea of the notion of God cannot allow what's called undue confusion. So God's main purpose in the text is not to give us accurate dates or accurate numbers, or in terms of the age of a king or scientific data about the age of the earth. Its main purpose, the reason God gave us any divine revelation at all, is to provide us with sufficient evidence that will lead to our salvation. This is his main purpose. So I sort of rank the various types of possible errors based on the degree of undue confusion. So that would be confusion that would unjustifiably hinder us from achieving our salvation, our main purpose. And I give percents to the various errors. So something like, is there an error that in the age of a king, is he 18 years old or 8? This is clearly an error due to the manuscript's preservation problem. What's the significance of that error in terms of falsifying Christianity or hindering us from achieving salvation? Very little, virtually none, I would say. It's a failure as an argument. What about if we could prove Moses didn't exist? Well, that's a lot more significant to me. I think my faith could survive, but I would say it's probably like 80%, somewhere between 80 to 90% significance in terms of disproving Christianity if we could prove Moses didn't exist. I mean, he's a foundational figure in salvation history and that sort of thing. Something like if you could prove there's a moral error, well, that's even hot, or a major theological doctrine that's an error. That's a lot higher. I'm about 95% certain that would falsify Christianity if there were such errors in the Bible. So I sort of rank the significances of these errors, and that's how I make sense of. That's why I'm a lot more cool with saying, well, this minor thing is an error, or the age of the earth is an error, and that doesn't bother.
Right, but do you at least understand the person who would say, if we can't trust it on the little things that we can check, why should we trust it on the big things that we can't check? I mean, does that make sense to you that someone might feel like that?
It does, but then I think you need to evaluate it on, but has God given us reason to trust that this is God's word? There are evidences that support the truth of Christianity, and that the Bible is sufficiently attached to the truth of that religion. Then, yeah, that allows you to take the good, the bad, and the ugly and assess it in the light of those, God providing sufficient information for us to live a moral life and develop a salvation-fit character and that sort of thing.
So we'll let that be the final word on that. Let's move on to politics for a moment. Let's just take a quick breather from the Bible. We'll get back there. Don't worry.
Just before we do, just as a yes or no, Robert, did that help at all in terms of the logical inconsistency? Like, do you see that I have grappled with that at all? Did it help at all?
No.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Go ahead, David.
Okay. Yeah, so politics, it's an important thing to all of us, whether we take the time to acknowledge it or do something about it or not. So I actually want to start with Dale on this, since Robert has the expertise. I kind of wanted to fold in whatever Dale says with his response. And so separation of church and state, we hear that a lot. I know that's important in America. Dale, you're not in America. I don't know what the rules are where you are. Robert, are you America?
Yes,
Are you U.S.? Okay, all right, good. So it seems like a very important thing, especially to those of us who don't believe. But even as a believer, I was a big supporter of separation from church and state because I didn't want the wrong church, for instance, making laws and rules. So I wasn't a very ecumenical Christian in that sense. So I just want to start with a basic question of, should there be a hard separation between church and state, whatever that means to you, Dale?
I think there should, yeah. If we're defining hard in the way I would, I think it's a great thing to have the separation of church and state. I think that's the biblical position as well, that the state should not be sponsoring and or actively endorsing a particular brand of religion. I think that we should allow the freedom of religion and the freedom of expression, the freedom of conscience. I think these are all good rights that both Canada and the U.S. are right to recognize. So yeah, I'm on board.
Okay, and just quickly, what does separation of church and state mean to you? How do you define that?
Yeah, so I would say it's the state should not actively promote and or persecute certain religious outcomes. It should allow for the freedom within a free and democratic society to have each and every individual be allowed to express their religious freedoms within So in Canada, we have for our constitutional rights, we have Section 1, the Reasonable Limits Clause, and there are strict legal tests called the Oakes test as to how you fulfill that. So I think the state should only limit our freedoms, freedom of religion, that sort of thing, within reasonable limits. And there's a strict test as to what a reasonable limit is. So that's how I see it.
Okay, and before I hand it over to you, Robert, I just want to quickly map out my theory on this. It's very simple, really, although it gets me into quite a bit of trouble. I am not in favor of a religiously ecumenical state. In other words, a state that is even-handed with all religions in all religious expressions within the bounds of how the state operates. I am in favor of a completely secular state. Those are two different things. So I don't want a government that one day does a Christian prayer, another day does a Muslim prayer, and another day does a satanic prayer. I want a state that doesn't do prayer. So with that said, Robert, where are both of us wrong?
I would agree with you that would be preferred. I don't think that's how this, at least the United States, was founded. Separation of church and state. I think atheists tend to twist that a little bit, to be honest. But I agree that you're correct there, that would be preferred. I'm confused about Dale's response, though. I could have swore you were in favor of a theocracy.
When did I ever say that? It's so a true
like that on the show before, or at least it was a form of theocracy.
So maybe yes and no. So I don't remember ever saying that on your show, but you do sometimes kind of, like, you think I'm a divine command theorist. I'm not, but you think that. So maybe it's the way I'm coming across. But so Israel was a theocracy at one time. That was good. That's great. In the future, I look forward to a theocratic state. That's going to be good. Jesus is the king and that sort of thing. But in the intermediate era, the New Testament recognizes, so Christ is one, he's defeated Satan with the atonement and the resurrection and that sort of thing, but it takes time. We're in a messianic era. It's not an all-at-once type thing. We're building up to the kingdom of God, ruling over all the nations and that sort of thing. So in the intermedium, I think it is best to have a proper separation of church and state. And yeah, I do think sometimes atheists go too far with that. But yeah, in the meantime,
if we're talking about something being amoral, like there's progression from the seed to the tree. Is it wrong for the seed to not be the tree? No. Is it wrong for the tree to not be the seed? No. It's a progression thing. It's occurring over time, but it's not wrong for it to be at any certain stage.
Okay.
What you're trying to make it sound like that's what this is. That's what the whole world is. That it's just things are kind of progressing as they are. No, there's something wrong about North Korea. Yes or no?
Yes, and yes.
And it's violating the rights of the people within it in the same way that rights were violated in the Old Testament, right? And the theocratic state of that war tribe that was going around and killing other nations because they believed they were God's chosen people, in the same way that it would be wrong for, in the future, our rights to be denied to us in the future theocratic state. The rights that right now you claim to value, but then will take away from someone else in the future, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I think you are absolutely right. So in that sense, the separation of church and state is not morally ideal. It's a compromise. It's something that, it's the lesser of two evils, something that has to be allowed because of our state of sin and that sort of thing. But yeah, it would be better. The moral ideal is that there is no period of sinfulness. We're just in a theocratic state forever. Like that would be the way it's supposed to be, if that makes sense.
And this is my point: is you are a theocrat when it is broken down to it.
Yeah, yeah.
You liked it in the past. You're looking forward to it in the future, and right now you don't even really believe that people should have the freedom they do. You don't think that it's moral. It's we got it.
Well.
I don't like it, but this is the way it's got to be for now. You actually don't support my freedom as an atheist. What do you think should happen to me?
Well, that's wrong. So I do support your freedom, even in the theocratic state. It's called hell. You have the option to not be a part of the theocratic kingdom, right? So, well, that's what hell is. It's a quarantine zone. Hey, I don't want anything to do with this theocratic state. I'm doing my own thing.
You think it should burn in hell? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, you won't be burning, right? So I believe in a quarantine model of hell, not a torture chamber model of hell.
Do you understand? In my intro, I was talking about how the people that are listening, that are on the fence, that, oh my God, the grass is literally greener on the other side. I'm telling you, you let that baggage go. Imagine waking up tomorrow, Dale, and not having not looking at Robert Stanley in a way that you would say, I think he should go to hell. Do you I mean, can you, like you watch a movie and you get into it for a second and you kind of put yourself in the role of the character, right?
Mm-hmm.
Try to put yourself in the role of not being that vindictive, that evil, that hateful, while you're calling it Christ's love. Dale, it's horrible the way that you look at non-believers or quote-unquote sinners, or maybe people that like to put dicks in their ass. I don't know. That's a bad thing, right? But imagine looking at the world without all that judgment that you deceitfully cloak as God's love. It would be wonderful. I'm telling you, Dale, it would be like dropping a bag of bricks off your back.
I find it liberating because I don't. It's not vindictive at all, right? Like I don't judge you. God is the judge. But even on God's end, I don't think you understand how I view hell. You've got this twisted version of hell from down in the South U.S. or something like that. But think of it this way. I've got like the C.S. Lewis model of hell in mind. So God is saying, this is what's right or wrong. I'm your creator and designer. I know what's good for you. This is the good life. This is the meaningful life. I mean, David and another Christian just did a debate on my show about the meaning of life. So this is how you live the good life. This is what's good for you. This is what will benefit you. And you are saying in your freedom, God made you a free will agent. You're saying, no, I don't want that. I don't want to worship you and ascribe worth to what you call the good things. I've got my own ideas. And so God says, okay, that's fine. You've got this place called hell where you can do that. You and all the other people that don't want to be with me or have an eternal relationship with me, you're free to go there. Now I will say this, it's not like, oh, cool, well, let's have a party in New York or city then. We're free of God and we can just do everything. You will be living in your sinful ways that are bad for you, right? Because you'll be totally separate from God's love, God's truth, all sense of goodness and morality. So imagine living in that, and that's where the bad parts of hell come in. It's not external punishment imposed by God as though he's torturing you and stuff like that, but it's internal. You recognize you're not living the way you should be, and you are living a sinful eternal life in this place. Does that help relieve some of the issues for you, or?
It sounds as loosey-goosey as your explanation for the errors in the Old Testament to me.
So let me just butt in and ask a clarifying question here for me as I've been listening to this. Dale, you spoke of the kingdom of God and so forth, and the Bible talks about the government of God as a kind of a monarchy. but most of the world has walked away from monarchies. So, are you saying that you believe that a monarchy is the best thing, and that's what you're looking forward to? I mean, why couldn't Jesus rule as, say, an elected president? you know, and beyond that, I had a follow up, but I'll leave that for the moment. Tell me, is are you longing for the monarchy?
The theocracy, yeah. With God as the monarch, Jesus is our king. And when you have a morally perfect, omnipotent, omniscient being that is worthy of worship, there is no electing someone else.
Okay,
That's the
so what does it mean to be a king in heaven? I mean, will there be politics? Will there be tax, property tax? Will there be crime? What are you ruling in perfected, where humans are perfected, and you're in a perfected place, and there's no scarcity? I don't understand the model of a king or even a president in that kind of situation.
it's yeah, well, you're ascribing the ultimate worth to God. You're worshiping him forever in an eternal.
Yeah, I get worship, but why does he need to be a king? I mean, why do we need politics at that point?
We don't need politics. Like that's it depends what you mean by politics, but he is our sovereign ruler for forever, and he's the paradigm of goodness and that sort of thing. He's gonna.
Robert, do you understand what I'm asking about
Okay.
what is there to rule in paradise?
Yeah, I think the
Help,
problem
help
that
me.
he's having is that he's using Bronze Age wording to try to explain modern societal exchanges, right? So I mean, he's using this term like Lord, that originated from Mesopotamia, and we somehow hung on to that, right up until the Enlightenment. And so he's post-Enlightenment using pre-Enlightenment terminology, and it really doesn't make sense. You're right. And the other thing is, you're saying that like we're these completed beings, right, David? We're kind of perfected with our new bodies and sinless, and I don't think he's addressing that part. He's just trying to find a way to explain the old terminology in a new context, right? But he's not
Because
addressing.
we don't need police, we don't need to pay taxes, we don't need street repairs. I don't know what a political system, whether you call it a monarchy or what, I don't know what good that is.
Well, there is development in heaven, and we would need a leader, a perfect leader for that, perhaps, right? It's
So we wouldn't be perfectly moral. We would still have to grow in morality. Is that what you're suggesting?
we wouldn't be perfect, but we would need development, not even necessarily on the moral end, but on other ends. I can grow in my knowledge and that sort of thing forever, and grow in different ways of enjoying my eternal life and that sort of thing. And you would need a leader to lead you in those ways, because even in our state of heaven, we may be sinless, but great, we don't have a need for police anymore. Nonetheless, we would have a need for a leader to teach us things. We would need a teacher and that sort of thing. So
It sounds more like a shaman or a yogi or guru or something like that. It doesn't sound like the term king would apply still.
yeah, well, perhaps that it's just a terminology thing. The king was what they had to express God's sovereign rulership and leadership over the heaven state.
You know why?
Sorry?
You know why
Oh.
they were limited to an inappropriate description, like God would be king in heaven that doesn't need politics, is because they were stupid. And we know they were stupid because we didn't learn about toilet paper until, what, 500 AD? We didn't learn about toothbrushes until the cowboy and Indian days. So people were stupid about toothbrushes before the cowboy days, right? And we're smart about toothbrushes now.
Or
And
sorry.
stupid about politics and theology even back then. Modern religions that come up now are way smarter. Mormonism is smarter than Judaism. It's just better because guess what? They have space. So that it's the same argument of I can write a better Bible. All I have to do is take out one bad part from the Bible. And look I improved it by editing. Or I just add in one more good thing, right? Things that come after are better. And what we have now, post-Enlightenment, this freedom, the concept of democracy, right? Freedom of speech, separation of church and state, a secularized form of government that doesn't favor one religion over another. That's better than what you're proposing, because what you're proposing is antiquated.
So Dale, let me give you the last word. Try to make it under a minute because we don't have a lot of time left for
the last section.
The big topic. So hit us with about a minute.
Take as much time as you want. I'm having so much fun with you guys.
Oh, awesome. All right, cool. So yeah, I think that it's, so in the first place, you, Robert, are stupid, and me as well. Talk to people 1,000 years from now. You think our terminology of using space will be smart? No. So I think that there is a limitation, right? God has to speak to the people back then as well as to us. And when he uses a word like king, what is that? What are the aspects of that that word is meant to convey? And I don't see any problem with talking about king. He's the sovereign ruler of everything, of creation and the universe. This is how the ancient Jews would define him. And the word king perfectly conveys that even to us today, or that's the way I see it. I don't think of the word king and then think, oh, well, there's a police force. They didn't have police back then anyways. But yeah, like I don't... It depends how you're using the word, and I think the Bible could be using the word king in he will be a regal ruler. He will be an almighty sovereign leader for the people, and that's the aspect that it's trying to convey using a word that would speak to people back then and still speaks to us today. I know what a king is. We can understand what a king is, so it is still useful today. Yeah, that's how I would respond there.
Well, I personally know what a king is too, and I don't find any part of it useful or appealing. So I don't want to ever go backward and live in a place where there's a king. But that may be part of the barrier for someone like me. I mean, when you're talking about your vision of this idyllic future, and you're talking about every knee shall bow. Mm-hmm. Before this king that we will be constantly giving worship to, I just say, ew. So, if there's a better metaphor than king, maybe Christians should consider using that.
Okay, was that the last word, or you want me to respond?
I guess so. That's just a thought to leave with you there. So,
okay.
This should be the more interesting part of the program, in case you didn't find the last two sessions interesting. I personally did. I want to try to moderate this in a way where we have a high-level discussion and stay out of the weeds. I know I'm going to fail, so I'm just going to make my intentions known to the audience before I get beat down. I don't want to turn this into another slavery discussion. Okay, we've got plenty of that. Matt Delahunty does it better than all three of us, so I don't want to get into the finger pointing of, oh, you're not defining slavery right, and you're not reading this passage right, and I want to try to have a higher level conversation, if we can, about the morality of the Bible in general. And yeah, we will probably break down to some specifics anyway, but I want to see if we can have a higher level discussion. So I'm just going to start off with a brief statement, and I'm gonna turn it to Robert and then Dale. So first of all, I would say in terms of the question of morality in the Bible, or morality in Christianity, or morality in God, however you want to break that down, morality in religion, I don't find that religion teaches anything or gives us anything of morality that we couldn't get without it. So whether there are some useful things in there or not, I find irrelevant. I think before turning to a source like the Bible, I wouldn't necessarily want to know, is there a useful thing in there I can get, but is there an absolutely necessary thing in there that I need? Because I can turn to Mein Kampf and probably find some useful things in there. That's irrelevant. That's not a source that I would go to for my morality. And so I think, first of all, a Christian has to make the case that the Bible is a source that people should go to and that we somehow need for morality. Second of all, I would say that in specific, many of the things in the Bible that seem to pass as moral don't pass my morality test. So we can talk about whether they're good because God said they're good. I don't care. I honestly don't care. If they don't seem good to me, and if doing something that the Bible says would be immoral to me, then it's still immoral. So I'm not entirely sure why it would be useful to use the Bible or any other book, for that matter, as somehow the measuring stick for what morality is. Morality is something that we humans have to negotiate among ourselves because we have to live with each other. And so your idea of morality may clash with my idea of morality. We're going to have to negotiate that. And I don't see the idea of a single book dictating what is moral to everybody. I don't find that useful. I'll leave off my third point for now because I feel like I've been talking too long. But just as a general rule, I don't see any reason to put the Bible in the place of a moral guide, even if there are some things that are good in it. I don't think that's fundamentally where humans should look for morality. And it's not just the Bible, but that or any other book, for that matter. Robert, religion, morality, thoughts?
I listen to you talk. I should listen to this show more often. I told you I had heard it before, but I don't listen to every episode, and I'm going to. I really enjoyed listening to that. I liked how you framed that, and I agree. I don't know that there's too much to add to it. I would be curious if you don't mind what Dale's response to that would be. I got nothing to say on that.
Dale, the floor is yours.
So the first thing that you said, David, is why on earth would you go to the Bible as opposed to any other source? I think this was your first main argument, and the reason is because this is the divine approved moral guide, and those other books are not, even if they include some things that are consistent with that. But this is what provides you the official moral guide if Christianity is true and the Bible is the Word of God. So that's why you should privilege that. And maybe you can get one or two things from other sources, right? The Bible itself admits this, that you have a moral conscience. That's a way to get moral knowledge, and you know that it's wrong to murder. You don't need the Bible to know that on your own. Or you could read some book or something like that and pick up, it's wrong to steal, it hurts people, or something like that. But if you want the complete or the sufficient moral guide, then you do need the Bible for that, because that's not necessarily going to be in every other book. There are differences between the moral guidelines in the Bible and other books. So yeah, that's why you would need the Bible, and it provides you the extremely important moral guideline of how to get saved, how to develop that total salvation fit character, and to go through the sanctification process on that end. The second thing sort of countermands that. So you're saying if something's immoral to you, on a relative standard, then that means it's objectively immoral for God to command it. So if to you it's wrong to say homosexuality is a sin or something, then that means it actually is immoral, and that's just illogical. That doesn't follow at all. When we have an objective standard, God is the objective standard of goodness, of morality itself, and he's telling you, look, this is wrong. I'm your creator. I designed you for, one man, one woman in marriage for sexual union. Then, yeah, that it doesn't matter what you think. the objective
Okay,
standard.
let me just give you a real example so that we don't float around with some of the more controversial stuff. One real example would be the New Testament. Let's go there. The rules about shunning. Now, we don't use words like shunning usually in mainstream Christianity, although some do. The Mormons use this word. But the idea of shunning is that someone has fallen away or committed some sin. They're a member of the church and they have not repented, and they've been visited by the elders and they will not repent, or however that process goes, and you are to not allow them into your house. Don't eat with them. Don't wish them Godspeed. And this would be true even of a family member. And so there are some very specific and harsh shunning laws in the New Testament that modern Christians don't tend to talk about today. But I would say that those rules are immoral, and that a Christian should not follow those rules, especially if it offends your conscience. I think that those shunning rules are exactly the wrong thing to do, and you will do more harm than good if you follow them. So you have, on the one hand, the Bible making a clear prescription of what one should do, and it definitely falls outside of what is good and moral, not just for me, but for many other Christians, as thankfully most Christians ignore those rules.
Okay, so yeah, I would just say, so in the first place, you're absolutely right, and I believe this, as my church teaches. Church discipline is a real thing, and excommunication is the proper word for it. In a Christian context, this is a punishment that is biblically prescribed, and there are certain standards of how you get there. It's not an immediate thing. You try your best to get the Christian to repent, but if he's just not repenting, such as the guy in 1 Corinthians who's sleeping with his mom or something like that, then yeah, you excommunicate him.
Hey,
Sorry? This is this is in the Bible. Yeah, there's someone who was sleeping with his mom or mom-in-law.
I think it was probably his mother-in-law, but that's fine.
Gotcha. So yeah, this is not allowed. He was unrepentant. So Paul said, look, you've got to excommunicate this guy. And that doesn't mean, if he's a dependent or something like that, his family has to shun him from the house. No, there are reasonable circumstances here, right? And this guy was a full adult. He was living on his own or something like that. But what happens in 2 Corinthians when we follow up with that case? Paul scolds the Corinthians and says, hey, you guys are going way too far. This guy is living in despair. The point of the discipline is to get him to want to come back. And he is repentant now. He's in despair after what he did. So let him back in. And this reflects in later church history with the Lapsi in 250 AD and Cyprian and all of that. People that sacrificed to the gods, and there is these debates between the conservatives. No, they sacrifice to the gods. The heck with them. They're out. They're going to hell and stuff like that. Whereas the Orthodox Christians.
So we don't have a lot of cases these days of someone sleeping with their mother-in-law, but we do have plenty of cases where people are living together unmarried, say. Do you think those rules should apply to those people?
Yeah.
I hate to say homosexuality because I'm afraid that that's going to take us down a rat hole, but obviously you think it would apply to those people too. Am I correct?
If they're engaging in sexual intercourse, it doesn't matter whether it's homosexuality or not.
Right. So I would say that even as a Christian, even while I was wearing the cloth, as it were, I had come to a point in my walk where I felt that despite what the Bible clearly said, and I understood what the Bible clearly said, that went against my moral conscience, my understanding of what a true, good, healthy relationship with human beings was. And so I joined the millions of people who ignore those passages or massage them in some way. If I had done those things, you, Dale, would say, oh, well, you would have been moral, but I would have been going against my own moral conscience. And so to me, I would have been immoral. And I find that to be truly problematic. Robert, you've heard a little bit of this conversation now. Weigh in.
I feel like the shunning examples, like while I agree with you, it's 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 not it's not offensive enough, I think, to make this point with Dale, because he's going to say, it's not that bad, right? And it's for the best. And
he's never been shunned. And apparently he was not a part of one of the churches that got sued for, I want to say, $8 million for this happening. This has happened on a number of occasions, because it is that bad when you're on the other end of it.
Yeah, I'm with you. Can I offer a different example?
Sure.
Numbers.
I already said from the beginning this was going to go into the weeds, so
I'm avoiding Exodus 21 at your request, sir. But
okay.
Numbers 15. God had told the Israelites not to gather sticks on the Sabbath, right? We're all familiar with that. Verse 33. And they that found him gathering sticks. No, it was 32. All right. And while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man that gathered sticks upon the Sabbath day. And they that found him gathering sticks brought him unto Moses and Aaron and unto all the congregation, and they put him in ward. This is already bad. They're basically, they abducted this person. No, they locked him up. Because it was not declared, what should we do with him? And the Lord said unto Moses, the man shall surely be put to death. Somehow God talked to him, but he said, he shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones without the camp. And all the congregation brought him without the camp and stoned him with stones. And he died. Okay.
Well, that sounds like justice.
Yeah. According to you, that's a moral thing to do. So let me ask you, if tomorrow I am gathering sticks, is it moral to hit me with a rock?
No.
If thousands of years ago I was gathering sticks, would it have been moral to hit me with a rock?
So I'm going to say no, but I'm playing a trick. There's a reason why I'm saying no. For you, specifically.
If I was a Jew in the Old Testament days, and I was gathering sticks on Sunday, would it be moral to hit me with a rock?
So yes, if you were working on the Sabbath or whatever, there is this law, right? This prescribed punishment for you doing that. And I mean, this isn't unique. There's a whole host of things. In terms of the sticks itself, though, that specific issue might have been unique because it was a symbolic gesture. It's kind of like an axe where they withhold part of their money and God kills them as an object lesson for the first instance of a case. So I'm not sure that picking up sticks qualified as work. It was more sort of the attitude of this first guy. He was considering it as work. It was sort of an act of rebellion, and this is why God acted so extreme to say these.
It's not written in the Bible.
That's not written in the Bible?
You just said something extra biblical to defend something biblical. You're adding.
So show me the verse where it says if you pick up sticks, and this applies to everyone. It's not a descriptive case, but it's prescriptive. That counts as work, and therefore you will be killed.
I literally just read that to you.
But it
and
isn't
the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Go throw stones at that guy's face till he dies from it.
To that guy, that's a descriptive case, right? It's not necessarily prescriptive for everyone. You get what I'm saying?
No.
Okay. Was everyone swallowed by a great fish?
No.
Okay, so it was only Jonah. That was a descriptive story unique to him. And what I'm saying is that I think this is a unique story, unique to that guy as an object lesson. Just like not everyone that didn't give all their money in the new church era, they weren't killed by the Holy Spirit, like Sapphira and...
Wait a minute. Was picking up sticks against the Sabbath or not?
I don't think it was. I don't think that counted. What's against the Sabbath is working on the Sabbath day, whatever qualified as work.
Picking up sticks, that's work.
I mean, especially in the context of,
But let me see.
you're cleaning up your lawn, your driveway. There's been a strong wind. That tree over there has blown off some branches. I think I'll pick them up and move them over here. I've got a few extra minutes. Let's neaten up the yard. I mean, that's picking up sticks to me. Or maybe picking up sticks is, you know what, I need to build a fire. I forgot to get some kindling yesterday. I think I'll just collect some today. There are all kinds of reasons you would pick up stick, and you could call it all work. I'm trying to get
It's a Jewish custom.
what you're saying.
They make special machines so that Jews don't have to actually cook the food. It's like it does it for them on the Sabbath. Like, we all know what this verse is saying. You're twisting.
No,
You're really intentionally being dishonest.
please stop calling me dishonest if you don't mind. I really don't like when people do that because I'm being honest, right? So,
Give me a chance, because I don't want to offend you. So let me fix that. I don't mean to call you a liar, right? I've never heard you say a lie.
okay.
When I say you're dishonest, I mean intellectually dishonest. You are choosing to see this in a way that isn't going to go against your already held beliefs, and that to me is why I say dishonest. It's not to
Like intellectually inconsistent, I think is that what you're going for?
yeah, but it's not just that. It's there's a deliberance to this, that you are deliberately saying things that don't align with what I think you kind of know is true, but you're not thinking about it, right? You're choosing not to look at it from a certain perspective intentionally, and then the words that you say, you believe are you're speaking truth, but there is a certain amount of avoidance of that annoying little cognitive dissonance that's occurring in your head, and that it would be the same as if I said you're being cowardly mentally, right? Like, I'm not saying you're a coward. I'm just saying you're it's like you should, and making a moral claim here, you should have the courage to look at this and call it BS, and you should have the intellectual integrity to be able to admit that this is just as false as the creation story. It's just false in a different way. It's not false epistemologically. It's false ethically.
Yeah, so under that guise, so both of you know me that I'm not, even if the text says what you says, that's not a problem for me. I don't have a problem with people dying for God's cause. So that's not why I'm trying to avoid it. I don't have an ethical dilemma. I just know the text. So I know the ancient Jews did not interpret it this way. We have rabbinic traditions. They did not. It was a question, what exactly qualifies as work under this verse? And they didn't take picking up sticks as a definitive, this counts as work if you pick up one stick. So David gave two examples, right? So there's the first example he gave, someone's going out and, oh shoot, I forgot to finish my work from the previous day, so let me just pick up a few sticks and get, just a little head start. That would qualify as work. But if you need to warm your family or something like that, and oh shoot, I forgot to grab sticks to warm my family, that would not qualify as work, and you wouldn't be dead. So there's a fun.
So actually, I would just have to challenge you a little bit on that, because I was looking at the passage myself, and it says they caught a man, found him gathering wood. Gathering wood is a type of phrase that you would use if you were, trying to build a fire, or trying to warm the house, or trying to make camp, or any of those. That's a phrase that you do, and I don't see how you would exclude that from gathering wood gathering. That's what this guy was doing, and so you think that it was okay and perfectly moral to kill this guy, and I even just putting myself in your mindset to the best that I can. God gave a clear law. He was disobeying it. Do you honestly want to defend that law as just?
Yeah, if you're giving it my proper
Yeah,
interpretation of
I'm
it.
giving it.
Because,
I'm giving it your interpretation, your spin. It's work. God said don't work. Now, I just want to address how far into the Christian bubble you have to be to believe that working on a Sabbath day is a death penalty offense. Most of us would look at that and say, yeah, okay, God told him not to work and he worked. That's not to die for.
yeah, so yeah, I do defend that. So I'm not being disingenuous in saying that, yeah, once you properly interpret what the command, there are explicit commands that where God says if you do something that then you get the death penalty, and we would look at that today as that's not worthy
Right,
of
I
it.
understand that. We would say that that is not a just punishment. That is not a crime. That should be a crime, first of all. But to kill someone or is not a just punishment. And so, since this question is about the morality of the Bible and hopefully a higher level look at the morality of the Bible, if a person sees that, like myself, for instance, or like Robert, and says, "Oh, that is not what I understand as moral," are they not? Can you not understand why we would dismiss the Bible completely as a guide for finding morality when that is in there as a law, and it is saying, yeah, violating this law of doing any type of work on this day means a death penalty offense. This is the moral intuition of this God. Can't you understand why we would say, okay, I'm not really interested in what else this guy has to say?
So no, I can't because it just seems like an emotional reaction. I've tried to no, well, I've done shows with both of you guys, right? I've done the assessment of how we're supposed to assess moral disagreements, and you guys are making the claim, so you have to bear the burden of proof and prove that it actually is immoral, and that
What am I
But,
hearing?
but I personally don't want to try to prove that this is immoral. I think that if what we're talking about is a person gathered some wood on a holy day, and the law was kill him. If I'm talking to someone who doesn't see that as immoral, I don't think that I can convince them. It's a little bit like the law that says kill anyone who's caught in adultery. We would have to literally kill almost everybody who is alive today and going back for a long time. There would be so few people on the planet if what we did was murder a person every time they were caught in adultery. Guess what? We're humans. We adulter. we do that. Sorry, you can sue us, but I'm gonna have a problem if you try to chop my head off or even go Lorraine Bobbitt on me.
Dave,
I'm sorry.
No, I'm with you. It just hit me, man. It was getting to a point of absurdity that I was actually just laughing and not even, but it just hit me. You and I are talking about, when we say the word morality, we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about Kant. We're talking about Rawls. We're talking about Mill, right? We're talking about the complexity, the philosophical discussion of ethics itself, right? I don't think when Dale uses that word, he's talking about that. And in fact, I don't know that Dale would have a lot to offer that conversation. But like Dale, what is morality?
yeah, so it is sad because I have offered it to you, but morality is so something is immoral when it violates a moral principle, a universal moral principle, right? Morality, in a categorical sense, like Kant would teach, there's a categorical imperative.
Can you replace the word moral principle with what you mean by that and then restate it?
Sorry, what are you asking me to do? Restate.
What defines a universal moral principle? And then use that in place of the word universal moral principle. with the statement, if that's possible. And the only reason I say that is it would be the same as if I was saying use a Phillips to attach the screw, and my definition of Phillips was a flathead. Then it would be better for me to say use the screwdriver that's flat on the end to attach the screw, because there would be confusion. We already had confusion with the word morality, and I'm not wanting there to be more confusion, because it took us, 20 minutes just now to find out that 2/3 of the people in the conversation were having a semantics problem, right? You really weren't talking about the same thing we're talking about. But now when I say, can you define it, you throw in another, universal moral principle. You see what I'm saying? I don't want to just do that again.
Well, so you understand what deontology is. Deontological ethics is rule-based ethics. Moral principles would be a necessary moral rule. So the preservation of human life, right? There's a principle of life preservation, or there's a principle of truth. These are sort of examples. In this case, it's the principle of life that's at stake. We're saying that principle is violated, therefore this action is immoral.
Where do the principles come from for you, Dale? Because I've had this conversation with Christians a lot of times, and what I have charged is that what Christians mean by moral is whatever God wants, and immoral is whatever displeases God, whatever goes against His will. When it comes right down to it, is that what we're talking about, Dale?
So no, moral principles are necessary moral rules grounded in God's essential.
Well, but with the example that we've got on the table, either picking up sticks or adultery, take your pick. It's wrong because God says it's wrong, and it's worthy of death because God says it's worthy of death.
Put it this way: we know that it's wrong because God told us that He gave us this command. He would not have given us a command if it were immoral.
But Dale, with your definition of morality, do you recognize that you can't even ask that question? Is the Bible moral? So, you're not even addressing the topic. Of course the Bible's moral if morality is defined the way that you define it. It's the principles, the universal principles that come from the universal creator, right? Well, in that sense, you believe that this is His book. So it's going to be circular reasoning to try to say the Bible isn't moral. There's no way that we could do that with you. And you have to understand that whenever people talk about morality, that's not what they're talking about, Dale. That's not what why we went through hundreds of years of philosophy of ethics. If that were the case, we wouldn't have had to try to figure out whether or not utilitarianism was correct, or whether or not Kant's categorical imperative kind of has some major flaws. We figured that out 300 years ago. No modern philosopher is going to argue Kant. We use him as a way to try to understand how philosophy developed the topic of ethics. But nobody's talking about ethics the way that you're talking about it. In fact, what you're talking about isn't ethics. That's just, God said it, I believe it. That settles it. That's not morality at all. We're talking about totally different things, and there's no way that you can even answer the question with your definition of morality.
Yeah, so again, it's you're not understanding what I'm saying then. So I would just say, actually, you can make judgments, right? You can ask whether or not, it's a question whether or not God gave this command, whether or not the Bible reflects His actual commands. You can also assess, is God violating a moral principle or not? We literally did that.
That's not morality. That's just trying to figure out what would God want me to do, and that's Bible study stuff, man. That's something you can do in Sunday school.
No, but this is assessing whether it's true. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, let me see if I can get some clarity and a little bit of agreement before we have to cut off for today. So, Dale, you said earlier that you were not a divine command theorist.
Correct.
So for the listener, the divine command theory is God said it, and so or some authority said it, and therefore that is the right and moral thing to do. So, with the example of picking up sticks on the Sabbath, gathering wood on the Sabbath, if God had not commanded that a person could not work on the Sabbath, would it have been immoral for a person to gather wood on the Sabbath?
So no, it wouldn't, because that's an example of a moral duty where God gives us.
So the only thing that makes it immoral is God said not to do it.
Well, so no, because it's a second stage thing, right? So I believe I'm a deontological ethicist and a virtue ethicist. So God has these overall moral principles. Why do we follow moral principles? They develop virtuous characters, as Aristotle said. And this is the underlying reason as to why God gives us certain commands, and thereby putting moral duties. They serve the interests of fulfilling that ultimate goal or purpose.
Okay. So once again, I don't feel as a moderator that I can explore that question or help explore that question of is the Bible moral, because it is going to eventually come back to, well, God said this, and then philosophy, and therefore that's the way it should be. You're not leaving us, Dale, I think, with any way to explore whether God's commands are moral. And maybe I guess the last thing I would ask for is that if you can bridge that gap, because I'm pretty sure that we've got some listeners who are wondering, well, how do we judge the question? So is there some way we can look at one of God's commands, say kill the guy who picked up the sticks, and then evaluate whether that is a moral command or not, or do we just have to accept that it is moral because that's what God said?
So this is what I mean. Like, you guys aren't understanding what I'm saying. So I think that I give a 65% probability that the Bible teaches a complementarian perspective, and that is immoral. How am I able to say that if what you guys are saying about me is true? Obviously, I'm able to judge as an outsider and say, look, there are three reasons for a moral disagreement that I can use to assess any given claim. If a skeptic comes to me and says picking up sticks and then killing them is immoral, I say, great, how do you know? What is the moral principle that's being violated? How does that relate to the moral hierarchy? Are there other moral principles at play that would override that given moral principle? And finally, what are the factual differences between us that are leading to this? So we do have objective ways of deciding. And I've employed that, so I'm not sure.
Well, I personally can't do that. I'm ill-equipped to do it. Robert may be more equipped to do it, but could you just maybe reverse that for, once again, the sake of the audience, whose IQ level is probably down nearer mine than yours, and just make the case for why you think it is moral, rather than asking me to make the case for why I think it isn't. Because I think it isn't because it seems awful. And I don't have better words than that right now. But maybe you can, make a case that I can relate to that tells me why you think it was right to kill the man for gathering wood on the Sabbath.
Yeah, so it was an act of rebellion on his part. And this came right in the context of God was setting up his nation, Israel, that had strict rules to be set apart from the pagan nations and played a significant role in salvation history. So saving as many souls as possible. This is my Molinistic defeater that both of you guys are familiar with or should be familiar with. And this is my justification.
But you don't think that God could have maybe quarantined the man, or
no? How would he?
Some other. I don't know how God would quarantine a man. Maybe he would build a prison, and then the man would be there, and food would magically appear in the prison, so the man could eat. But I mean, what do you mean? How would he? He's God. He's got every option besides killing in front of him.
Yeah. So under the Molinistic defeater, if any circumstances other than what happened changed, then less souls would freely choose to be saved as a result. This is why he does it the way he does.
And that's why I say it's impossible to evaluate whether the Bible is moral or whether God is moral. Because at the end of it is a Molinistic defeater that says, hey, more souls are saved this way than that way, so it's moral. End of discussion. We don't get to have that discussion. And when we're talking about morality, I have to agree with Robert. That's not how we think. That's not how we talk. For people looking forward to more talk on this, by the way, I've been tentatively invited onto Dale's show later this year to talk about moral philosophy. And so I'm getting a sense of what I'm getting into and what I've got to work for. But I personally am doing my best to come alongside you and sit on the same side of the table and understand and negotiate this definition. I don't see a way to get to your side of the table. But I'm gonna give the last word to Robert on this. And Robert, as we wrap this up, in fact, I'm going to give the last word on this to Dale, so that Dale can make your final statement, and then after that, Robert, you can wrap up your final statement on this with your final statement for the podcast in general. So, Dale, take a few minutes and kind of summarize your thoughts.
Well, I think I said it all. I'm not really sure I have any overall summarization because it's been various topics. So, yeah, I'm happy to give it to Robert for his closing.
Very, very good. And by the way, thank you, Dale, for your participation. You have been a good participant in a fun, if not sometimes frustrating, discussion. But the frustration is most likely due to me. And so, as a moderator, I just want to say thank you for your participation. Robert, give us a summary and your last word.
So, Dale mentioned a couple things. He said he gets his morals from the Bible, and he believes that morality. And if a straw man in here, Dale, please interrupt. Like, don't let me just keep going if I'm saying it wrong. But
Okay.
More or less, this comes from a divine source, and the way that he defended it with was with deontology and virtue ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And now his defense is almost recognizing that we're talking about something else. Even though whenever we asked the original question, is the Bible moral? Dale, I think you knew what we were meaning by moral, but you went ahead and answered the question with a different definition of the word than what everyone else understood it to be.
What do you mean by moral? Just so I know, because I don't even know what you're talking. Like, what do you mean by moral? If you don't mind answering that.
So that is a pretty big question.
Okay.
I think that morality is something that we're constantly understanding better as we go. I think it's something that can exist objectively and subjectively simultaneously. I don't think it's a relative thing. I think there is a standard. However, that standard is evolving sociologically, and that is the way that we understand how to treat one another, how to treat conscious beings, how one agent, and by agent I just mean an individual with personal agency. So this is excluding rocks, for example. Should be treated, and throwing a rock at another human being is wrong unless that other human being was going to do something to you, right? So it would make sense in a reason for defense, or a defense of a people, or something like that. But the man gathering sticks did not violate the nap, as it were, right? He didn't do anything that hurt anyone else. And these people threw rocks in his face. And that's why David and I can look at that and say, well, that's clearly immoral. And you would come back and say, yes, but that's what God said, so that makes it right. The defense that you give for that, the problem with deontology is that it forces you into certain corners of purity that would cause more harm than good. So Mill was able to destroy this fairly easily, because it's the question of, the Nazi comes to your door and knocks on the door and says, are you hiding Jews in here? During World War II time period. It's a lie to say no. but also if you tell the truth, the Jews will get killed. And then it was pretty easy to destroy Kant's philosophy, even though it's not. It was a foundational part of understanding philosophy, because we had to start with that. We had to start with the categorical imperative that you should always do as you would think everyone should always do all the time, right? And then the other one you referenced,
Virtue
the issue of virtue ethics, the ability to access eudaimonia, as it were, Aristotle's whole concept that we should look to another person that is virtuous and live like they live, and that would be the way for us to be pious and the way for us to be ethical. That was also corrected. In fact, even Kant rejected it. So it's funny that you used my two defenses. They didn't agree with each other. Aristotle never met Kant, of course, but Kant was very familiar with Aristotle and rejected virtue ethics for the very reason that if you're not virtuous and you recognize that, and you look at someone else that is virtuous, you're saying, I need to mimic that person to make me virtuous. You don't know that you are virtuous enough to recognize virtue in another. And that's why virtue ethics makes no sense in terms of Christ, because you could make the same virtue ethics argument about Muhammad or Buddha or Aleister Crowley, for that matter, right? Because you're not virtuous. So the very reason that you're looking toward another for virtue refutes the fact that you're able to decide who is virtuous. So I say all that to say, your whole argument doesn't make sense to me, because you can't reference our definition of morality whenever you're not using it, and whenever you are referencing our definition of morality, the two philosophies that you use within secular morality, one, disagree with each other, and two, are both proven to be false through philosophy. But that was my whole issue with your response there.
Okay.
Well, once again, thank you for both of you. Dale, I'll give it to you to close out, but I will just say as my final thoughts, again, thank you for both sides for giving me something to think about. Where I sit right now is mostly where I started, and just listening to Dale's part of the argument is always interesting to me. So the question, we dealt with three questions. Is the Bible true? I tried to bring a little bit of nuance there, because the Bible is either true or not true all the time. But we all agree that the Bible has maybe some things in it that aren't accurate. Okay, so that's one data point. And we dealt with politics and religion, church and state, and we talked about various political systems, and at least two of us don't want a monarchy. We're not interested in a king and don't know what that means, but we all agree that probably doesn't mean in religious terms what it seems like it means in everyday mundane terms. So once again, I'd say the Bible maybe is a little unclear there. And then on the third issue, well, is the Bible moral? We once again kind of agree that we can't even assess whether the Bible's moral based on our normal human intuitions. And so I find whenever I'm assessing these types of questions about the Bible, I'm lost, and the answer is always some form of, well, you just need to trust it, because otherwise it doesn't seem to be true all the time. It doesn't propose a political system or ultimate solution that I find compelling, and it doesn't seem moral. Now, am I being evil when I say that? No, that's just how it comes across. And so I think that the Christian and the skeptic has a little bit more work to do when it comes to finding some kind of agreement or détente on these matters. So I hope that I am a part of further discussions as we try to carve out some places where we can get some genuine understanding. Again, Again, thank you both. Dale, you can close us out since it's your show.
Okay. All right. Have a good week, everybody.
And I would like to direct everybody to the righttoreason.com as well. Right about the time this will probably come out, we were speaking to a guy that believed he could heal people. Another episode following that up as we speak to Dave Warnock, a guy who's just realized or was just diagnosed with ALS and knows that he's about to die, and we discuss what.
Love that guy.
Yeah.
Love that guy.
Then we're following that up with a panpsychism debate, and after that, I will be debating a man that believes birds aren't real. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Righttoreason.com, or find it on YouTube. Click subscribe, hit the bell just to make sure that you catch those episodes, especially if you have ever wondered if birds are real or not. We're going to find out. Thanks, guys, so much. I really appreciate this.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.